Great, thank you, Mike. I am going to share my slides very quickly. There we go, assuming you can all see that. Okay, fabulous. Okay, so today is obviously all about the panel discussion, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to hearing from experts from across the real estate sector. We're going to hear their thoughts, their ideas, and their experience of using AI in our space. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves in a moment, but firstly, I'm going to introduce myself and also CACI and give a bit of an introduction to the topic we're talking about today to sort of set the tone, so to speak. So that will last about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to spend most of the session talking with the panel, asking key questions, and then there's going to be 5 minutes at the end for questions. So please do pop them in the chat, as Mike just said, and I will get to them. So my name's Hannah Smith. I'm a principal consultant here within the property consulting team at CACI, and my role really focuses around leading on thought leadership, which includes emerging trends and also technology as well, which is why it's relevant to today. And I'm also responsible for solutions. So much of my role focuses around listening to our clients' key business challenges and then identifying data and technology that will help them solve those challenges. And I'm talking to you from CACI, which is a global consultancy, and that focuses on leveraging data and technology to answer challenges from across a really diverse range of sectors. So here in the UK, we're a 1,500 employee strong business, and we work across sectors including real estate, of course, but also we work across finance, health, logistics, retail, national security, and so forth. So I'm talking to you from the real estate team. I mean, we partner essentially with the largest landowners and landlords in the country, and also globally. And we support them in making better decisions on their assets. And we do this using a broad range of data, software, and also consultancy. What we do is we build a lot of our own proprietary data sets, but we also collect primary research. We build tools and platforms, and all of these are done with the intention of providing insights to our clients. I guess most importantly here, though, we understand the spaces in which we work, and so we're able to advise our clients on what their next action should be. So we're talking about AI today, and if you'd believed the press, you'd believe that AI was an emerging trend and it had only been around for the last 2 years. But as a society, we've been using it for far longer. So many of the homes that we have cloud-based voice search services in the form of Alexa or Hey Google. Our cars tell us how close we are to reversing into the car behind us. We use facial recognition technology to unlock our phones. And the recommendations we get on things like Netflix and Spotify, they're all personalized to us. And those have been things that we've been using for years, and those are all using AI. None of these are particularly new, but what's happened in the last 2 years is that the kind of phraseology around AI has become not just something discussed by data scientists, but it's talked about at the pub, around the dinner table at home. And so it's become a really, really exciting time to discuss this topic. When we think about what AI actually is in our world, the real estate world specifically, our world being understanding people and how they engage with place, we have a useful framework that we can use to define AI, and we've split it essentially into 3 different applications. So we've got AI that can enhance our understanding of the world as it currently is. And so what we mean by this is we use information that we already have at our disposal, but we use this technology to draw insights on a much larger amount of information than a human could do to tell us things that we didn't already know. So that's application 1. Application 2 is using it for forecasting and predicting. So this is essentially where we use information that we have to predict likely outcomes for things that haven't happened yet. So for example, if I open a store, how much turnover is that store expected to make? And then the third application is large language models, which is arguably why we're sat here talking about it today, which is really the thing that's come live in the last 2 years. It's one of the newer applications, and essentially what it is the user-friendly interface of AI. So the release of ChatGPT, to the general public 2 years ago really created that hype that we're kind of still talking about today. So I'm just going to bring these 3 different applications to life with a couple of quick examples. Starting with method 1, which is understanding the world as it currently is, but faster and better than a human could do. So CACI used this technology to build our customer-wide segmentation Acorn, which some of you might have heard of. Acorn is a geodemographic segmentation that essentially splits every postcode in the country into distinctive groups based on their attributes, and attributes being things such as affluence, age, lifestyle. And what it does is it combines over 200 variables to put the whole of the population into 6 categories, 22 subgroups, and then 65 subtypes based on their common characteristics. This would be a really, really hard thing, if not completely impossible, for a human being to do by themselves. And that's where AI comes to help us do this. So what data science and AI can do is take billions of random data points or characteristics of different people in this situation and sort them into groups for us. And so as you can see plotted on the chart on the page, using a neural network, AI can help us identify a set number of groups of people within the UK population and also tell us what is really kind of defining about that group of people. So in the instance of Acorn, AI has told us that it's age, affluence, and house type that are the major levers of what sets us apart from each other. And AI has essentially allowed us to continue to evolve this product over the last 40 years and different iterations of it. Next, just looking at an example of predictive models and forecasting. So here we have our online Halo forecast, and what we've built essentially is a prediction of how much online sales a physical store generates within a catchment. So we built this initially to reflect the reality that people aren't physical shopping or online shopping, they're just shopping. And that's kind of an old-fashioned way of looking at it. And it was also to prove the fact that the role of the store goes beyond just the sales that go through the tills. And the store plays a really important role in the broader catchment in terms of visibility, awareness, access. And so we've used artificial intelligence here to actually quantify that. So using actual spend data on hundreds of brands across the UK, artificial intelligence have helped us forecast, and we've been able to predict the impact of opening or shutting a store on how many online sales are transacted within that catchment. For example, on average, if you've got a £5 million turning over store of Zara, on average, that generates nearly an extra £1 million of online spend within that catchment. And what we can also do is look at that by different asset types. So, for example, the online Halo is bigger for a city centre than it would be for an outlet. And we've been able to quantify that using this very, very clever technology. And then finally, the third application, we have large language models, which are a more recent application of AI. And in the form that we know them, they're actually only 2 years old, as I mentioned previously. And you'll recognize a lot of the logos here. So this is the very consumer-facing part of AI because of how accessible it is to everyone. So we have intelligent search engines such as ChatGPT and Copilot. We have virtual chatbots that assist us when we're shopping online, potentially for some of our favorite brands. And then we've got also the cloud-based services that I mentioned at the start, like Alexa and Hey Google. And in many of these instances, the role of a large language model really is to provide that user-friendly interface to what is basically just a large data source. In our own business, for example, we've developed a conversational interface for our kind of geospatial tool. So you can ask it questions such as, okay, this point here, tell me everything about this point on this map. And it can do that for you. But what that's doing is just tapping into a huge amount of data a little bit more easier. Or another example, just to reference my first slide, the ability to have a conversation with an Acorn group, which again is just tapping into a load of data, but making it accessible to the user that's using it. So those are just some real world examples of how AI can increase our understanding of complicated data sets and enhance our ability to query them as well. But I'm sure our esteemed panel in front of us will have many more examples to draw upon. So let's introduce them now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to James to start.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, and thanks for a very interesting presentation. I'm a venture partner at Labs. Labs are a venture capital business specializing in the real estate sector, and we look at companies from seed to Series A funding, and we're constantly evaluating about 3,000 startups a year. So we're seeing a lot of really exciting young companies utilizing AI in each of the cases that you've just described in their products, which is tremendously exciting for us.
Brilliant, thank you. And Rhiannon next.
Hi, so I'm Rhiannon Owen. I work at British Land. British Land, if you don't know it, is a large UK-focused property company, and we invest in campuses and offices across the UK, and then also retail as well. I lead the AI working group there and the digital transformation initiatives, as well as a lot of data and analytics.
Thank you. Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Sibley. I'm the head of PropTech Innovation at Related Argent. Related Argent is one of the leading property development and asset management companies in the UK. We're best known for King's Cross Central, the big mixed-use regeneration just above the station, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. I previously worked at a startup which actually used AI as part of our kind of core value proposition, and previously to that led innovation at a company called Nuveen Real Estate as well. So yeah, happy to be with you here today.
Thank you. And finally, Alex.
Thanks. Alex McCulloch. So I lead the real estate team at CACI and also look after innovation and sit on our AI board. So all the things which come through our business, both real estate and beyond, tend to sort of come through me when it goes to the AI perspective.
Thank you. Okay, great. Good to have you all here. To start off with the first question, I'm going to throw this at you first, Rhiannon. In the context of real estate, what does AI mean? What do we really mean when we say AI?
Oh, I think you could do a whole webinar on what does AI mean, couldn't you? But I suppose in the context of real estate, I don't know if you've seen that meme, but it's a half-finished building, and there's a quote on it saying, "ChatGPT, please finish this building off for me," which of course I couldn't do. But I guess if you think of the life cycle of a building, there are so many areas where we could be using AI and should be using AI to manage down our risk and manage down our costs, which of course are super high, especially in construction. And so for us, it's working hard with our supply chain to do that. You know, when it comes to visualizing plans and selling our space to our customers, increasingly we're using technology like virtual reality and spatial planning, which can be really powerful tools. Then you've got operating a building, and we have a vast wealth of data we have on our occupiers and our customers. You know, we work with you on using your ACOR data to influence what we do with our portfolio and who we get in there as customers. And I guess more recently, our customers in London, particularly on our campuses, you know, they're really keen to get smart enabled buildings. So we have a whole digital placemaking team, and their sole focus is making sure that our buildings are smart enabled. So whether that's having smart passes or having smart sensors to optimize our heating, our ventilation and our aircon. So I guess for me, there are opportunities at every stage of the property life cycle, many of which we are using already, but I would say so far probably more in the more traditional AI sense, and we're moving towards the generative AI now.
Thank you. And James, what's your perspective? What does AI mean in real estate?
I think, as Rhiannon's just said, it's a significant opportunity because the real estate process, from acquiring an asset, even just purely for an investment process, through to disposition, there are so many different parties involved at so many different stages that essentially it's a dysfunctional process. But I think the exciting opportunity is that, especially with the large language models that you've described, it's a way of drawing information away from the vast amounts of written data that we have to make it structured data, to be able to organize ourselves, to learn to optimize. I think all of those use cases that, you know, they're literally every stage of the life cycle can benefit from this. The trick is how to make it relevant for real estate companies to implement it in the first place.
Thank you. And Jack, I'm going to throw this question over to you next.
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, at a very high level, what you call data science versus AI is a very blurry barrier. And I suppose, being cynical, you know, depending on who you're speaking to, almost anything that's not a linear regression could be called AI if you're, I suppose, selling the product in that case. Not that I'm suggesting that's what CACI I know you guys are doing much more complicated stuff, but yeah, I think it's certainly one of those buzzwords that come into the industry. And actually, when I used to work for a startup that was using AI, we never really used to talk about it as much because people would always be more suspicious about it. rather than if we just said we're using really complicated data on that side. I think one of the interesting things, particularly within generative AI, but also more broadly, is that a lot of the kind of more generalist models that you see floating around, and some of them we've mentioned here in terms of ChatGPT and OpenAI and lots of those kind of what you call in a large language context, the kind of foundational models, are typically trained on public data from the internet. And, we can go into a whole other conversation about how those are trained. But coming into an industry like real estate, where a lot of the data, as James kind of alluded to, is private data. There aren't millions of copies of commercial leases on the internet. There aren't, there isn't a huge repository of, I suppose, the real estate specific data on the internet. So I think there's a really big opportunity for real estate and particularly startups, but also businesses more generally, to take these foundational models as that kind of foundational layer, but then build kind of sector specific real estate models that can outperform those generalist models because they've been trained on some kind of private data that's more specific to real estate. So I think that's a really interesting trend with AI. Is at the moment when we talk about AI, we talk about large language models. We're talking a bit more about these foundational models themselves and the general productivity tools like Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT. I think over time that's also going to evolve into many more real estate specific applications that often are being driven by the startups that James and I and everyone are seeing in the market as well.
Thank you. And Alex, finally.
Yeah, I think to build on sort of what everyone has said, and Jack, I think you summed that up quite nicely there. Is when you're talking AI to people, and if we take a step back from, say, the day-to-day or the real estate world, you generally have people fall into two buckets. They're either big proponents of it and they're dreaming of a world of flying cars and not having to work, or they're hyper suspicious of it and they don't believe it and they're not entirely sure where it's going to go and what's going to come next. And to an extent, those two mindsets do also exist in our world. So we are all in a place, and you can tell by the answers, where we are kind of getting our hands dirty. And so you've got a series of answers there, which I would wholeheartedly back. And I'm quite reassured to hear that they are focused on, like, how do we start making this apply in our world? What are the actual practical immediate applications? So from Rhiannon's point around optimizing office buildings, optimizing operations, through to James, the whole thing about process, and Jack's point around we need to point some of these big technology solutions at private data. At this stage, honestly, the answer is it requires quite a lot of head scratching. And I think there is a tendency sometimes when people say the word AI, to your exact point there, Jack, people used to be either suspicious or would put people off. Now they just think they're going to end up with this amazing large language model. We know from our experience that actually our first steps are in the day-to-day are, yes, getting a nice large language model onto elevate a user interface, but it's also about massively accelerating the speed and complexity of some of the calculations we can do, and in doing so reducing cost. And actually, one of the main motivations from AI in our world at the moment is about efficiency, to be totally honest, which isn't especially sexy and isn't a flying car, but is actually a key business function and critical to the way I think we all sort of seek to operate businesses.
Which leads us really nicely on to the second question I was going to ask the panel. And Alex, we'll start with you, just for the sake of variety. What's the difference between hype and reality when it comes to AI? So have you seen any actual meaningful impact on your organization yet?
I mean, to answer the second one in terms of impact, absolutely, and I'll come on to that. But I think hype is the word. Like, so, and I know you guys will probably be familiar with it, but there's this thing called the hype curve. And the way a hype curve works is, if you imagine sort of excitement going up the y-axis and then time going along the bottom, and something like large language models drop, and that excitement goes rocketing up, and everyone is like, it's going to change the world. We're going to see nothing but total transformation, and everyone gets very, very carried away and very, very excited. And then a little bit of time goes by, and all of a sudden the public starts to think, you know what, this isn't quite doing what I thought it was going to do. I'm not seeing my world changed, and things aren't really transforming the way I thought they were. And we call it sort of, as we tip over the edge, is like the peak of inflated expectations, and then you plummet into the valley of disillusionment, which is kind of where I'd say we probably are now as a society, which is, it's crap. I could do it better. I don't know why I bothered asking. I have to rewrite ChatGPT every time I ask it to do anything, and you become quite dismissive of it. What then happens is actually change starts to manifest itself. And so I'm anticipating over the next few years, we'll start seeing incremental changes, which as consumers, we'll sort of just take on board and assimilate into our day-to-day. And then if we were to pause and look back, we would see actually the world has changed quite a lot, but it won't feel like overnight transformation. So in a real estate world, in our space, I sort of touched on this before, but we're in the business of data analytics and sort of doing those sort of big computations. So what it means is today we can take what would be considered a low value project, like understanding performance of a supermarket or retail park, and we can leverage analytics onto that previously you only as a developer or owner would have put into a big regional mall. So we can access data sets which are significantly significantly big, understand how people are spending there, where they're coming from, what their value are, and do that very quickly. So it's effectively speeded up computation and increase the complexity of calculation, allowing us to get to answers to inform investment decisions quite easily on relatively low value things, whereas previously you would have gone into those a little bit blind. That's the first one. And then the second one is actually sort of a bit more in that step change space, where we're seeing applications on things like if we're operating in non-European markets, we might use satellite imagery to understand what the variations of affluence look like. And then in doing so, use that to build out a customer segmentation. So if you are investing in a market where there isn't much in the way of demographic data, you could actually really drill into that and understand who those are. Now, that is the sort of example of a step change in analysis that is exciting now. And when we look back in 3 years' time, there'll be lots and lots and lots of those, and the world will have changed. But right now, it's sort of, here's one nice shiny thing, and here's a lot of sort of efficiency savings.
Thank you. And James, I'm going to ask you next, hype versus reality, and how has AI impacted your organization so far?
So, I mean, I think that it's interesting, Alex's points. I'm not sure if we're quite in the trough of disillusionment yet. I think it's coming.
More to fall.
Yeah, I think we have, because what we're saying, because we're sort of early stage venture, we're looking at lots of companies that are using this product in their software. So that the number of companies that have got AI in their name is definitely increased. I suppose that's in the hype. There's certainly helping with valuations of early stage companies. There's lots of people wanting to invest in them. But you really have to look at their application and their products, right? So I've heard some people openly dismiss, if anybody uses a large language model to summarize a document, I think they're being lazy and I won't trust what they're doing, which I thought is sort of missing the point. But the really smart models that we're starting to see coming through are those that combine the question with the answer. So if you can reference the document within a PDF and show where you found the information, then you're starting to build trust in that point. And I think what's going to happen is, as we get better at prompting the questions, then the reality of using AI every day becomes much more trustworthy, and we realize it can be to save time. So for me, I think that getting into the I've forgotten the term in the Gartner hype cycle, but that plateau of productivity, that's it, is really to build trust over time. And that's the interesting thing here. I've got no doubt that it delivers efficiencies because we're seeing it within our own business, and we're starting to see it from those companies that are being applied. So the reality is, I think we're just going over the roller coaster curve, but I think the long-term future of this is definitely very much here to stay.
Thank you. And Rhiannon, I'm going to throw this at you next. So what's the difference between hype and reality when we're talking about this stuff? And have you seen any positive benefits to British Land yet?
So I suppose, unfortunately, I'm an accountant, and so I'm always looking at that bottom line. And I think for me, that difference between hype and reality is all about going from a prototype stage to actually implementing AI. So we see a lot of impressive AI products. We have lots of people around the business coming to us and saying, oh, look, I found this great new tool. It will change the way we work. I think when the reality is actually implementing some of these can be really costly and really difficult from a change management perspective. So I think that's the biggest barrier, is how do you integrate it into your business and deliver the business benefit that you're expecting from it? Are there ongoing costs? How do we support the product? What about data privacy concerns? And I guess, James, to your point around the explainability of the data of what you're producing. I guess for us, and I know that sounds really negative, and we are actively looking at a lot of different options at the minute. I think we've definitely seen some quick wins, and I guess a change in the way our people operate and the way they interact with tech. So we are big Microsoft users, and we're starting to use some of the native Microsoft tools like Copilot to facilitate what we do. And that's really benefited because we're incrementally taking away some of the more mundane tasks and to focus on, value add stuff. Saying that, we haven't found one that, does our purchase orders for us and that kind of thing yet. But as a business, I guess we're very reliant, as I said before, on working with our suppliers, whether that's CACI or property agents or property developers, and making sure that we're engaging there, because that's where we see the real benefit to come from them.
Okay, thank you. And then Jack, finally from you.
Yeah, I think to the point on your slide where you said AI has been with us for a long time, I still think AI has been with property companies for a long time. It's just people don't really notice it. I mean, a silly example is whenever usually a transaction manager might get sent an opportunity to buy a building, historically for the last 10-15 years they've always looked it up on Google Maps and looked at it on Street View to see what it kind of looks like aside from the glossy pictures. Now Google Maps and Street View is using AI to pull that together. Therefore, do you want to put a big branded piece to say every time we buy a building we use AI in the due diligence process? You could to an extent, but you'd probably be fudging it a little bit. But I do think there's lots of kind of embedded uses of AI already throughout real estate companies that are making a difference, even just on building operations. A lot of the sensors in buildings, even around air quality sensing and temperature sensing, for example, use kind of some form of what you could call AI at the edge on that side. So lots of our buildings already have some level of complicated data science built into them on that side. So I think that's, to an extent, it's always been an evolution, not a revolution. I think the hype at the moment, certainly I'm seeing a lot of the productivity software, you still definitely need to keep a human in the loop on that side. It's getting better with more proof of work and evidence and reliability, as the other panelists have mentioned. I also think from a productivity only point of view, it's probably not fashionable to quote Peter Thiel these days, but there's that classic Peter Thiel quote, which is your product has to be 10 times better than the next available option. And I think the productivity gains for some people and some roles and some areas are kind of that order of magnitude. But with a lot of them are more at the end. I myself, for example, I've had access to Microsoft Copilot. It works really well for some tasks, but sometimes I just find it easier to just read an email rather than have it summarized for me, or just read a 2-page document on that side to really get into the nuance of it. So it very much, I suppose, depends on that use case on that side. The other area of hype that I think will calm down a bit as well is the idea that this is maybe probably mostly from a landlord point of view, but I think the vast majority of the real estate market is going to be a kind of user of these products rather than a creator of them. You need such a huge amount of data to train these models that it's always going to be the idea that you can have your unique data and you can create a better model than anyone else, and it can become a unique differentiator for your business, I think is I'm probably quite suspicious of. And some people have been hyping that up to say if you've got the most buildings or if you've got some buildings you can pull all the data from, that you can build your own unique personalized AI on that side. I think the amount of data that it takes to train these models, and real estate is not a hugely data rich environment. Maybe some of the large services firms can pull that in as a kind of strategic business differentiator for them, but most of the real estate market here is going to be using third-party applications of AI that have been trained on lots of clients in the market's data on that, rather than building their own from the ground up on that side.
Thank you, everyone. And we've touched on some of this already, but my third question to you all is what are the big opportunities we can see coming down the line in the real estate space? And I think I want to frame this from the point of view of kind of short, medium and long term. So all ideas welcome. And James, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a company that I know that Rhiannon's using. She talked about space planning. So one of our portfolio companies is a company called Layout. So when you take an office floor, it generally takes currently between 10 to 12 weeks to approve a space plan on a floor. And that's interaction between the architect, the cost consultant, and the client to try and find what's the optimum fit out. Layout can do that in 10 to 12 seconds, give you costs and give you a carbon footprint for the floor too. But what we've found with Layout is that it is very useful in that it's giving a series of options that quickly promote a discussion with an end user, with a tenant, or with a potential occupier. So it's a very good marketing tool because it quickly transforms what is a plan, which most lay people in real estate don't really understand a plan, to quickly show a 3D model. And I think that optimization of design process is one of the really exciting things. I think that as I've seen more and more consultancies investing in their data infrastructure, you're seeing the opportunity for engineering firms like Arup and WSP, cost consulting firms like Exiga and Turner and Townsend, that are starting to build up their cost models. And so I think that the optimization for building design is the thing that really can change. And again, Rhiannon said about the problems of cost. I think in 5 to 10 years' time, the early stage design for optimization for whole life carbon will be readily available because the data sets will have been built up at that time. And what takes, it's generally a sort of somewhere between a 5 and 7 year process to design and build a building. I think you will shave significant time off that. That will come down to 3 to 4 years, and will also mean that you can procure based on the entire knowledge of what the building will be and what it would look like, reducing risk and reducing costs. So I think the future for building design and procurement has got a significant opportunity for improvement. And that's just one of many other examples. But that idea of getting to generative AI is the bit that I think is one of the most exciting.
Thank you. And Rhiannon, I'm going to come to you next.
Sorry, just finding the unmute button there. To pick up on James's point, it's about how do we optimize, because that's how we'll get returns. And I mentioned at the beginning about having sensors in for our heating, ventilation, aircon systems in our building. Like at the minute, we're picking that data up through a dashboard, and then we're making a human is making decisions based on what that's saying. Where we'd like to get to in the future is that it's predicting when those machines need to be serviced, and so you're taking out the manual steps in that, and rather than something breaking and then an occupier having to log a call to say this is broken, you're actually anticipating when those things are going to break based on historic trends, and you're fixing it before it becomes an issue. And like James said, in the whole life cycle of developing a building, there is so much risk in that area. And you think of when you're building a building, if you've put in a electricity pointer in 1 meter from where you should have put it in, you might not pick it up as an issue straight away, but when you come and paint the wall, put a painting up, whatever, that's when it becomes an issue. So picking up where those things are going wrong now, and you can use AI to do that, because the AI will know exactly where that power point should have been on the plan and will flag when it's not meant to be there. So there's incremental little steps that we can do, and then I guess what we've been really focused on for the last few years, and what we'll continue to focus on, is getting our data in order, because with AI, it's a classic case of you put rubbish in and you get rubbish out. So we're really making sure that we're building up a timeline of really good data, whether that's corporate data, customer data, or building data. I guess your question on what it could look like long term, I have no idea, but I'm really excited about it. And I think if the growth in Gen AI over the last couple of years is anything to go by, it could be pretty revolutionary. But for us as a company, we're making sure that we keep our finger on the pulse, and actually being really knowing what's a fad and what could actually be really value accretive to us, what should we be investing in. So yeah, really exciting, but for us it's incremental and optimization at this point.
Thank you. Alex, opportunities.
I was going to say, just to build on that point, I think where any new technology really comes into its own, but particularly AI, is on solving a problem. And so if you went from your sort of short-term to your long-term spectrum, I would almost say that spectrum is a journey along a problem. So it's not necessarily about hypothesizing what the AI technology will be at the end of that journey, but more what is our optimum solution, and then leveraging whatever technology is available to get us there. So, you talk, and Rhiannon, you were sort of hinting towards, well, you weren't hinting towards it, you were saying this, but to put a label on it, that idea of being in a world today where you've got sort of HVAC optimization, and you can understand sort of how a building should be working and optimizing that today, versus getting to a perfect digital twin of a building, whereby you can preempt what people are going to do on the third Friday before Christmas in terms of their engagement, their behaviors, and therefore what you need to be thinking about in terms of electricity consumption and car park management and all the rest of it. That digital twin piece, that's sort of the end goal, because that allows you to really, really be across the optimization of it. And those digital twins are being used at the moment in the energy sector. So if you see those big wind turbines being used, a lot of those will have a full digital twin of that, so they can preempt components of that might break down based on how much the blades have been spinning over the preceding year or whatever. Likewise, it's used in logistics space to optimize sort of fuel purchasing and fuel in fleet management, when and how you need to be refueling your fleet. So those sorts of, that idea that you can start mirroring the real world in a digital space and then make decisions off the back of it, I think is our end goal. And we can see how we're going to get there. It's just, as you said, around the journey to getting there is getting all your infrastructure in place, getting your data in place, and so on. So I think that's your sort of short to medium long-term continuum. I think to take it to sort of the consumer world, which is sort of where we tend to play, I think from a real estate perspective, I could see a world where right now we're in a position where we can get to a view of ROI on marketing and leasing activity. So we can say, okay, you undertook this event, turning on the Christmas lights. Did you actually attract any new users? What was their spend like on that event? Was the money worthwhile? Did you open people's eyes to it? So that activity of being able to say, okay, well, I spent X £100,000 doing this. Did I get a return on that investment? That's a world we're in today, but it requires a degree of manual intervention, whereas you could very easily see at the end of that continuum a cycle whereby the whole model becomes iterative and optimized, so that you are making media buying purchases off the back of what your anticipated ROI is, and you're constantly learning and iterating. But again, it comes back to data. You need to have built up that data to feed that model. You can't just go straight from A to Z today. And then I think, we're all shoppers, we're all consumers. There will be things we're going to see in the next 12 months which are gimmicky, like a large language model you can interface with in a shop, or a dynamic, map of a shopping centre showing you where to go to find a pair of black trousers. But I also think that we'll end up quite quickly in a space whereby you can have actually a fully personalised experience, where you could go into a shopping centre, have a picture of yourself and say, I want something to complement my favourite top, or I want something to go with this outfit, and then get directed to the shops to go and look out for that. Now, we're not there yet, but we will be there, I think, maybe a little bit quicker than we anticipate, because those are the things that get people's attention, and a lot of our retailers and occupiers of our spaces will be driving that technology forwards because that's their primary focus.
Thank you, Alex. And then finally, Jack, what do you think are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think largely, I suppose the three big buckets that we think about have been talked about. So I think these are starting today, and I think they're only going to get better on that side. And those are kind of development, which is building design, but also construction on that side. But really, particularly building design is probably where there's massive cost efficiency to find, and where it's something that's slightly more in the control of developers on that side versus the contractors on the kind of more construction piece. The building operations, fictive building operations, I think that's already starting, and there's lots of different solutions that can be piloted that have various levels of success of working. I think getting that from recommendations that then rely on FM teams to kind of fully non-human in the loop is probably one of the earlier areas that's going to happen on that for some use cases. And then understanding customers as well, I suppose customer overall, which is both understanding your customers for first party data, but also third party data, like your kind of Acorn side. But also providing those customer experiences, which Alex talked about there. I gave some examples. So I think those are kind of the three buckets that we see as well, which is that kind of development, building, design, and then during asset management, as it were, your kind of front of house and back of house operation side versus customer experience piece. And I think across all of that, also you're then seeing Copilot for everything. I think almost any software provider, even if they're not not an AI company natively, is now thinking about how do we launch Copilot for our product. So I hope that just as a new general interface for the real estate industry to use, that will increase productivity overall. I think jury's probably still out on that, and that's probably the area where there's a bit of a kind of particular hype curve piece that's probably going to happen on it. In the long term, I think what I would say about AI compared to, I think we've all been in this market long enough in terms of where we've seen other technologies like blockchain or the metaverse come out, and actually PyLabs have some good research on this about is AI different this time, and it does feel like it is different from those other kind of previous hype curves, which never really materialized. So I think the long term is probably easier to predict than the medium term in some way, depending on how you define it, which is I'm pretty confident that the AI and whatever definition you use is going to become more important and start powering a lot more businesses, and that your kind of business success is going to be linked to the success of your AI strategy over a long-term horizon on that side. I think the medium term is probably slightly harder to say exactly, and there's probably going to be lots of, in the same way we talk about stranded assets from an ESG point of view, are there kind of stranded business models that don't manage to pivot fast enough on that side? And probably at the pointy end of that, you've got your content creators on that side who are still doing manual content creation, whereas the quality of automated content creation is advancing at an amazing pace. If you look at what some of the image generators as a proxy for that can do now versus 2 years ago, but I think ultimately every part of the real estate supply chain is really going to look at their business model, and that's the probably hardest bit where you're trying to fight against. Is this upskilling? Is it reducing costs, which means potentially people losing their jobs, and everything in between? So I think that's the one that's the hardest balance to find in the medium term, and the hardest to predict for each area.
That sets us up for nicely for our next question, which we'll probably have to cover a little bit quicker if that's okay with the panel. But we want to quickly touch on risks. So Jack, I'm going to be very unfair and throw that straight back to you. What are the kind of perceived risks?
So I think you go a whole panel on all of this. I mean, just to, you've got risks as long as your arm in theory. All of these is regulation. There's ethics, is understanding where your data is going, kind of data privacy. There's personal data, and so on and so forth. I think one that's in particular talking about the theme of implementation and practical applications of AI on this panel is a lot of, and Rhiannon mentioned this earlier, which is working with your supply chain on this. A lot of the time, real estate is such a long supply chain, and even in our role as kind of developers and asset managers, it's us working with our supply chain to adopt that, and the risks of either not trying to push your supply chain, encourage your supply chain to innovate on one side is one risk. On the flip side, it's just hoping that technology is going to be the silver bullet, and that you can just launch the technology and it will be good enough to do the rest. It really is the marriage of humans and machines that makes this technology work, and not understanding how your contractors might be thinking about it, or your supply chain might think about it, how they're incentivized, what their contract structures are, and so on and so forth is a big risk if you really want to lead in the adoption of that on that side. So I think that's always in technology conversations, the most underrated risk and kind of critical path that gets missed and leaves a kind of, not just in AI, but generally a kind of technology delivery gap, is the supply chain engagement and incentives.
Thank you. And Alex, you next.
Yeah, I would exactly. I would build on that. As a business, we've got 5 core principles that we sort of come at whenever we're looking at anything related to AI or advising clients. Number one on that is our keystone as a business is to do the right thing, and that's the right thing by clients, but also the right thing ethically. So when you are in AI in particular, you're in a minefield to an extent, because you're not necessarily, unless you put the framework in place, in control of the output. So you need to retain a degree of human intervention before, and I won't go into all those horror stories about brands who have launched a marketing campaign off the back of an AI model without having a human read it first. Not fair on the brands. But those things happen. So you need a human interface to do it. So there's a degree of ethics, but there's also being across the legislation. So we've got the EU AI Act coming down the line. We've got GDPR. All of these things actually represent a significant business risk. From Rhiannon's perspective as an accountant, you'll be well aware of the consequences of misstepping on some of those. So there's a degree of, you need to know your beans, you need to know what it's about. And that sort of leads on to having that focus. And Jack, your exact point on supply chain, I would agree on. Zeroed in on having data and AI as your core business, having that focus on actually, as a business, do you understand that? If you're using someone in your supply chain, have they got the capabilities to do what they say they're going to do to get to that end goal? And then my final point on that would be sort of relevance and purpose. So not losing sight of where your end goal is and getting distracted by all the things, because if you have got an internal team and you have got the capabilities and you have mitigated all the risks to go and develop something yourself rather than use a third party to do so, it's very, very easy for the people who are doing that development to sort of get slightly sidetracked and go off down rabbit holes and to see something cool over there and kind of lose sight of what your original plan was. So I also think there is a risk in terms of just staying on track and staying focused on what your end goal was, what that problem was. But there's a lot of risk along the way.
Yeah, thank you. Rhiannon, you next. What are the risks on your radar?
Yeah, I think related to what Alex said and Jack, and it's not to take on too much, I don't think, at any one time either. And it's really about managing that change management, because you can put in an AI product, but you've really got to get the adoption, and there will in any organisation be a very healthy level of scepticism over anything you implement, and actually teaching them how to use it appropriately. So that for me is all I would add on what the other guys have said.
Okay, thank you. And James?
I think just in the benefit of time, there's two main risks. One is not investing in your own data and your own data infrastructure. Without it, you're not going to build up your own set that you're going to be able to rely on and build on. You may not see a return in 12 months, but you certainly will in 3 years, and definitely will in 5 years. So invest in your structured data. And the second, I think, is the risk of not doing anything and not getting started. I think you need to give a wait and see approach is not a healthy thing to do here. And those businesses that are holding back, I think, are really going to miss out in years to come. So I think the sandpit in which you allow people to play in, I think, is really important, and to make sure that you do, it's to frame that within the strategy that's going to support your business growth.
Okay, thank you. I've just checked the question chat and we haven't had any questions in yet. So another call out for everyone that's on, please do post your questions. But in the meantime, we'll go over our final discussion topic. And Rhiannon, you mentioned it about halfway through in terms of you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So the last topic we're going to discuss is around data. And I guess the question to all of you is, how do you see your data environments having to change to make AI as impactful as possible in your own organizations? And I'm going to start with James.
I think it's critical. When my previous role at Great Portland in the States, that's what I did. I built the data warehouse and the data lake to bring all of that data together. And that was just for the basics of trying to take different pieces of information that you can use, just using Power BI and different elements. But what's really important is that once you started to build on that, then you're starting to get in the different pieces of data and all of the things that we've talked about, from customers, from smart buildings, and you're building up your very rich, structured, organized data set. You have to, without it, I think you really will miss out. It's that use of cloud technology is something that when I've looked at other industries, real estate has a real advantage, and we're not really burdened by legacy. We've got like a green open field in the sort of main sense, and being able to use that data and combine it with our tools and models and Excel is the real opportunity, and to getting started is the key. That's what you have to do.
Thank you. And Rhiannon, you next.
Yeah, I totally agree with James on that. So it's something we've been doing as well, is building a data warehouse and really focusing on having a consistent data model. So, you get footfall from one system, sales from another, rent from another service charge, and actually you only really get some good insight if you put that all together and you look at it as a whole. So it's really, I think, whatever AI we look at, it will just be based on having that consistent set of data. So we feel like that's where it's worth making the investment right now.
Great, thank you. And Alex?
What question to finish on, Hannah? Data structures.
Say the best till last, obviously.
I suppose my thinking on this would be obviously echoing the points around data lakehouses and data warehouses, but specifically as a business, this sounds really basic, but understanding the differences between data engineers and data architects and data scientists, and making sure you have the people doing the right things that they should be doing. So building a data environment is quite different from interrogating a data environment, which is quite different from creating the systems in which you can import and export data from that same environment. So I just think having someone who understands those worlds is a good starting point, and a lot of people don't. And then I would also say within that, being aware and conscious of the things which make property unique. And in terms of the data sets we get, we tend to have lots and lots of disparate, really different sorts of data coming in. You know, James, you touched on it in terms of rent roll or in yields or in legal documents or in consumer data, and actually getting those to connect is quite hard. And also being quite conscious of the challenges that spatial data brings to the play as well. Because again, in property, that spatial dynamic from a consumer perspective is really important. You know, where are my customers coming from? How do I get more of them? That having that structure actually requires a degree of specialist skill sets as well.
Thank you. And Jack, data environment.
Yeah, I know I'll be a bit contrary here. By the end of the everything when I else got the challenge to respond. I think generally I definitely agree with the principles everyone else talked about. I think being just strategically nuanced in how you implement these within your own business. It's not a matter of every single data point that's ever generated by any of your buildings or anywhere in your business necessarily needs to come into the same data environment. It might be you've got different data environments, for different use cases, and as I mentioned, it might be different from a development point of view versus the terabytes of data that can come out of a large building with a BMS with 20,000 data points that are communicating every 2 minutes or 30 seconds. You don't necessarily want to put all of that into the same data environment. So it's working out what data you need and what data environment for what use cases. And I think finding that kind of balance of, to an extent, we'd rather be conservative and put in more data and save data in particular, like what's your historical data in particular. A lot of this is not just about what data you bring in, but what level of time series and historian do you keep on that data, because often the time series data is more valuable than having just a live view. But what do you put into what data environments? How much data do you pull in on that side, accepting that you can't do everything for both today's use cases, but also accepting there might be new use cases down the road that you're not quite aware of yet. And then lastly, I'd say the data environment is not the be all and end all in terms of the impact of AI on real estate. We've talked about embedded AI already in some of these areas, but also there's a lot of value, I think, specifically in customer that AI is going to be creating through groups like CACI in terms of just better understanding your customers from third-party data on that side, which doesn't have a reliance on your own data infrastructure. So I don't have to have a perfect, beautiful data warehouse to go and potentially get CACI to provide some really value additive work to tell me about my customers, as long as they know, basically what retail park I have and what shops are in there, for example. Obviously that can be enhanced, but I do think sometimes there can be a kind of over focus in some models on all of your own data, whereas actually there's a lot of third-party solutions that don't have a pure reliance on that. And lastly, so I know I'm going on too long, there's also a huge opportunity for AI to help clean up your historic data and to help manage these data environments themselves. So actually using AI to help with data engineering and data visualization and data science generally, and all the different kind of angles of how you create your own data environment. So I think there's, again, probably a load of mud at the wall for my head there, but I think it gets very nuanced very quickly, and you have to really decide what are you setting out to do.
Thank you. And thank you all for sharing your thoughts. We do have some questions in the chat, and we've also got 1 minute left. And so I'm going to pick a question at random. The one I'm going to pick is from Nick Smith. So Are there any exciting opportunities for AI and data capture aside from satellite imagery mentioned earlier? And I'll just let one person respond because I'm really conscious that people have things to get back to after this. Anyone want to take that one?
Well, I'm seeing quite a lot of stuff around from the customer point of view. People be able to provide feedback and customer feedback in lots of different ways, in more unstructured ways, like via voice note, for example, and bringing that all into much more kind of customer experience quality. So that transformation of qualitative data and unstructured data into quantitative structured data is another kind of example of how AI can transform that.
Yeah, no, I'd definitely echo that one. It's one we're doing as well, which is sort of use AI to transcribe and then pull out key recurring themes within that data. Makes constant customer feedback much quicker.
And to change your product, so using it to find, because in a product development world, you used to have A/B testing. It's quite easy to get to. Now, when you're using chatbots, it's quite harder to find out what the customer's looking for to try and find those models. And we're seeing some exciting things in this space too.
Thank you, guys. We have run out of time, so just want to say again, thank you everyone so much for joining and listening, and thank you so much to our panelists for agreeing to take part. I'll hand over to Mike now to close up, but yeah, appreciate everyone's time.